My story really starts back with when I was a kid, and my brother had an IEP. And so his entire journey, he had an IEP for a learning disability and for speech and language. And his entire journey, has really kind of helped guide me into the role that I am in today. And when I started teaching over 15 years ago, decided special ed could be something I would do, and suddenly realized how much I loved it and fell in love with it and resonated with a lot of our kids and families. And till this day, continues to be where my heart and passion is in supporting all children. And I continue to really focus on more of this leadership and building capacity work, because we know so deeply how much both teachers, leaders, and parents need guidance and support in navigating a very complicated system, that even super well-educated folks need support navigating, because it is so full of wires and things to navigate that I really feel like it's such an important place is to be able to provide appropriate guidance to all layers of the system and all folks really supporting the needs of our kids. Ingrid, what about for you?
Yeah, my mom was a director of special education. So similarly sort of grew up watching it and was very sort of set on not becoming an education, like not going into education, not being a special education teacher. Um, but after college, I did some traveling, wound up back at my parents' house for a bit and subbed to make money like while I was living at home for a bit and just fell in love with it. Like, I was a substitute teacher for students with disabilities and just felt that like feeling that these kids were awesome and they, were not always getting what they needed and just became super passionate about kids with disabilities. And that started me on my journey and led me to, work as a teacher and administrator and then start my own business in special education.
What are the most significant changes you've seen in special education over the past decade?
This is a really great question. And I think that there are obviously the pandemic really shaped sort of, I think, a big change in the field, but also sort of was a catalyst or, for other changes. And then there were changes that were sort of happening before COVID that just became super exacerbated when COVID hit. And so, I can think of a lot of areas where things have changed around MTSS and intervention and how schools are thinking about the tiers of support. Um, Autism is on the rise, and we see sort of a lot of that playing out in schools in different ways. Um, but school is really hard right now. I think things have gotten really challenging, and schools need and students need as much support as they can. And the work that we're doing in special education has become more and more prevalent as numbers are growing, and the need to really understand how to do this work better becomes more and more important to the overall health of a school and a school system.
Absolutely. And I'll echo what Ingrid shared. I really do believe that since COVID, we've really seen an increase in quite a few things. And I think we've seen a huge increase in requests for assessment at the schools I serve. We're really seeing a lot more parents being interested in getting their kids more services, which then leads into the conversation that Ingrid mentioned around just like intervention in general. Does the kid really have a disability, or are there other ways to support the student? And I think that's also comes with a rise in mental health concerns that have showed up post-COVID for children, and really understanding how the special education world can support kids, as well as how schools can build out their tier 2 and tier 3 programs for social emotional support at school, and even their tier 1 social emotional curriculum for children, to really ensure that that's a large part of what's happening in the school system as well, because we're seeing such an influx of referrals specifically for mental health reasons, and really seeing that schools are trying to think also creatively about what does it look like as a whole to support social emotional needs post COVID. I think the other thing that we've seen like a huge rise in is the understanding of dyslexia and the understanding of the need for structured literacy, and really knowing that the programs that really serve about 20% of our population really need to be revamped and looked at. And we're seeing laws happen across the nation. California recently passed one where we're required now to ensure that students are being screened at the younger ages, specifically for dyslexia. I think there's just a lot more understanding of how students with dyslexia learn to read, and a lot more awareness about programs that actually work to do that work that I think wasn't always as much of a forefront. I think also just in general with the concept of the science of reading becoming a big boom across the nation, we're just seeing a lot more awareness of folks really being invested in reading. So I think that those are some major shifts. We've seen a lot of shifts, but those are some major ones that we've seen over the last several years.
I just wanted to point out one thing that we didn't that neither of us mentioned, but is just so prevalent right now is the teaching shortage and teacher shortage, and how, all teachers are really, struggling to, stay in the field. People are leaving, all of that. But the impact that that has on our kids with disabilities, and even things like identification. So you have simultaneously a whole lot more kids getting referred because they're behind, potentially because of COVID, mental health stuff, all of these things. And then you have those folks that are actually serving them or evaluating them that are, not as prepared, I think, as they used to be, and not by any fault of their own, just a huge amount of teachers that are new and inexperienced, and don't really, haven't necessarily had really strong training in how to differentiate between, all of the different possibilities of, is this a disability? Is this just a kid behind? Is this mental health impacting access to education? And all of those questions are critical when we think about how are we going to serve, this influx of students. And, ultimately we want to serve everybody, but we also don't want to identify kids with disabilities that don't actually have them. And that's one of the risks that happens when you have this like combination of forces.
Okay,
As a follow-up question, do you ladies feel that districts have been able to keep up with all of these challenges and changes?
I think I'll piggyback off of what Ingrid was mentioning. I think the teacher shortage aspect, which we know in special ed is not new. This was happening before COVID. It's been exacerbated since COVID. But we have had issues with fully staffing special education roles for a very long time. Special education has the highest turnover rate as far as teachers go in the nation. So this has become a problem. It's been a problem. It's been exacerbated. And every year since 2019, we've seen even more of a decrease year over year of teachers leaving the field. And so I think that that makes it very difficult when special education teachers often are the people that hold the knowledge in the school for what is best practice, what needs to happen for students, what really is a disability, what is something we need to evaluate further. They really are in a lot of ways the eyes and ears at the school. When we know a large majority of our leaders in campuses have a general education background, they really do lean into our special ed staff for guidance and support. And so when you're not fully staffed, we make sometimes decisions that maybe aren't exactly in line with where we want to be, out of the need to serve all children, but not really having all the full picture of information. So I do think that what we've also seen as like an influx and shift is we've seen a huge influx in the amount of paraeducators that are supporting children across the nation as a way to fill in some of the gaps for not having enough teachers. And so we're seeing more and more of these roles come up where we have folks that don't have a ton of experience, who are not paid very well, really trying to serve our highest need kids to fill the gaps of some of the teacher shortage that we're seeing. And so I think that that brings up some additional concern in regards to how are we really ensuring that teachers receive the best support and have what they need so that they want to be in this field, so they feel equipped and feel supported, so they can build a team with paraeducators, and it's not just the paras kind of filling the role. We're also seeing a lot of long-term subs that are emergency credentialed, don't have what they need to really do the work. And that really is a disservice to our kids. So I do think schools are really trying. There's a lot of creative options out there. There's schools that are trying out ideas with increasing pay for special education teachers. There are states that are reducing requirements for teachers. And I think there's good and bad that comes with that.
I was going to say, we can debate about that. Yeah.
Bad that comes with that to get folks into the space. But I do think there's a lot to unpack here in regards to, the challenges with this right now and how schools are able to keep up with all of the changes when we just don't have enough people right now to really do the work and enough people who have the background to really understand the work.
Yeah, the deep experience. I also see um, in districts, leadership is drowning also, right? They're, managing increases in behaviors. And I think sometimes our district leaders, are dealing with whatever is coming at them day to day. And it's really hard to come out of sort of the whirlwind and think strategically and think longer term about how they're addressing some of these problems. But that's really key to ensuring that they actually do address them, is to really start thinking about, okay, how are we tackling this for this year, but how are we thinking about what we can do over the next 5 years? And that's something that I think, districts aren't always really strong at in special education, is that strategic sort of thinking, and where quite frankly, folks can use, great people like Glynis from the outside to come in and support that bigger picture thinking, because I think it's just so critical to not just, it's like a fire hose, right? And how you're never going to stop, you're never going to slow the water if you're always just drinking from the fire hose and not sort of stepping outside and thinking about some of the bigger picture things and systemic work that needs to happen to keep people in the field, to keep people learning and growing like in a long-term way. And so that's one of the things that I think districts hopefully will start to do a better job with, as different things become available for them to support them with that stuff.